Chapter 1, Part 1. The Tortoise with a Pretty Daughter. Narrated by Chukwuma Wanido. Once upon a time, there was once a king who was very powerful. He had great influence over the wild beasts and animals. Now, the tortoise was looked upon as the wiser of all beasts and men. This king had a son named Kenyan, to whom he gave 50 young girls as wives. But the prince did not like any of them. The king was very angry at this and made a law that if any man had a daughter who was finer than the prince's wives and who found favor in his son's eyes, the girl herself and her father and mother should be killed. Now, about this time, the tortoise and his wife had a daughter who was very beautiful. The mother thought it was not safe to keep such a fine child, as the prince might fall in love with her. So she told her husband that her daughter ought to be killed and thrown away into the bush. The tortoise, however, was unwilling and hid her until she was 3 years old. One day, when both the tortoise and his wife were away on their farm, the king's son happened to be hunting near the house and saw a bird perched on the top of the fence round the house. The bird was watching the little girl and was entranced with her beauty that he did not notice the prince coming. The prince shot the bird with his bow and arrow, and it dropped inside the fence. So the prince sent his servant to gather it. While the servant was looking for the bird, he came across the little girl and was so struck with her form that he immediately returned to his master and told him what he had seen. The prince then broke down the fence and found the child and fell in love with her at once. Stayed and talked with her for a long time until at last she agreed to become his wife. He then went home, but concealed from his father the fact that he had fallen in love with the beautiful daughter of the tortoise. But the next morning he sent for the treasurer and got 60 pieces of clothes and 300 rods and sent them to the tortoise. Then in the early afternoon he went down to the tortoise's house and told him that he wished to marry his daughter. The tortoise saw at once that what he had dreaded had come to pass, and that his life was in danger. So he told the prince that if the king knew, he would kill not only himself, but also his wife and daughter. The prince replied that he would be killed himself before he allowed the tortoise and his wife and daughter to be killed. Eventually, after much argument, the tortoise consented and agreed to hand his daughter to the prince as his wife when she had arrived at the proper age. Then the prince went home and told his mother what he had done. She was in great distress at the thought that she would lose her son, of whom she was very proud, as she knew that when the king heard of his son's disobedience, he would kill him. However, the queen, although she knew how angry her husband would be, wanted her son to marry the girl he had fallen in love with. So she went to the tortoise and gave him some money, clothes, yams, and palm oil as further dowry on her son's behalf, in order that the tortoise should not give his daughter to another man. For the next 5 years, the prince was constantly with the tortoise's daughter, whose name was Edith. When she was about to be put in the fitting house, the prince told his father that he was going to take Edith as his wife. On hearing this, the king was very angry and sent words all round the kingdom that all people should come on a certain day to the marketplace to hear the palaver. When the appointed day arrived, the marketplace was quite full of people, and the stones belonging to the king and the queen were placed in the middle of the marketplace. When the king and queen arrived, all the people stood up and greeted them, and they then sat down on their stones. The king then told his attendant to bring the girl Edith before him. When she arrived, the king was quite astonished at her beauty. He then told the people that he had sent for them to tell them that he was angry with his son for disobeying him and taking Edith as his wife without his knowledge. But that now he had seen her himself, he had to acknowledge that she was very beautiful and that his son had made a good choice. He would therefore forgive his son. When the people saw the girl, they agreed that she was very fine and quite worthy of being the prince's wife, and begged the king to cancel the law he had made altogether. And the king agreed. And as the law had been made under the Igbo law, he sent for 8 Igbos and told them that the order was cancelled throughout his kingdom, and that for the future no one would be killed who had a daughter more beautiful than the prince's wife, and gave the Igbos palm wine and money to remove the law and send them away. Then he declared that the tortoise's daughter, Edith, should marry his son, and he made them marry the same day. A great feast was then given, which lasted for 50 days, and the king killed 5 cows and gave all the people plenty of fufu and palm oil chop, and placed a large number of pots of palm wine in the streets for the people to drink as they liked. The women brought a big plate to the king's compound, and there was singing and dancing kept up day and night during the whole time. The prince and his companions also played in the market square. When the feast was over, the king gave half of his kingdom to the tortoise to rule over, and 300 slaves to work on his farm. The prince also gave his father-in-law 200 women and 100 girls to work for him. So the tortoise became one of the richest men in the kingdom. The prince and his wife lived together for a good many years until the king died when the prince ruled in his place. And all this shows that the tortoise is the wisest of all men and animals. Thank you for listening. But the moral of this story is that always have a pretty daughter, as no matter how poor they may be, there is always the chance that the king's son may fall in love with them, and they may thus become members of the royal house and obtain much wealth. Chapter 1, Part 2. The Woman with Two Skins. Nigerian Folktale. Narrated by Chukwuma Wanedo. Eyamba I of Calabar was a very powerful king. He fought and conquered all the surrounding countries, killing all the old men and women. But the able-bodied men and girls he caught and brought back as slaves, and they worked on the farms until they died. This king had 200 wives, but none of them had borne a son to him. His subjects, seeing that he was becoming an old man, begged him to marry one of the Spada's daughters, as they always had plenty of children. But when the king saw the Spada's daughter, he did not like her, as she was ugly, and the people said it was because her mother had so many children at the same time. However, in order to please his people, he married the ugly girl and placed her among his other wives. But they all complained because she was so ugly and said she could not live with them. The king, therefore, built her a separate house for herself, where she was given food and drink, the same as the other wives. Everyone jeered at her on account of her ugliness, but she was not really ugly, but beautiful, as she was born with two skins. And at her birth, her mother was made to promise that she should never remove the ugly skin until a certain time arrived, save only during the night, and that she must put it on again before dawn. Now, the king's head wife knew this, and was very fearful lest the king should find it out and fall in love with his father's daughter. So she went to a juju man and offered him 200 rods to make a portion that will make the king forget altogether that his father's daughter was his wife. This the juju man finally consented to do, after much haggling over the price, for 350 rods, and he made up some medicine which the head wife mixed with the king's food. For some months, this had the effect of making the king forget the father's daughter, and he used to pass quite close to her without recognizing her in any way. When 4 months had elapsed, and the king had not once sent for Adiha, she began to get tired and went back to her parents. Her father, the Spada, then took her to another juju man, who, by making spells and casting lots, very soon discovered that it was the king's head wife who had made the juju and had enchanted the king so that he would not look at Adiha. He therefore told the Spada that Adiha should give the king some medicine which he would prepare, which would make the king remember her. He prepared the medicine, for which the Spada had to pay a large sum of money. And that very day, Adiha made a small dish of food, into which she had passed the medicine, and presented it to the king. Directly it was dark, and all the lights were out. She pulled off her ugly skin, and the king saw how beautiful she was, and was very pleased with her. But when the cock crowed, Adiha pulled on her ugly skin again and went back to her own house. This she did for 4 nights running, always taking the ugly skin off in the dark and leaving before daylight in the morning. In course of time, to the great surprise of all the people, and particularly of the king's 200 wives, she gave birth to a son. But what surprised them most of all was that only one son was born, whereas her mother had always had a great many children at a time, generally about 50. The king's head wife became more jealous than ever when Adia had a son. So she went again to the juju man, and by giving him a large present, induced him to give her some medicine which would make the king sick and forget his son. And the medicine would then make the king go to the juju man, who would tell him that it was his son who had made him sick, as he wanted to reign instead of his father. The juju man would also tell the king that if he wanted to recover, he must throw his son away into the water. And the king, when he had taken the medicine, went to the juju man, who told him everything as had been arranged with the head wife. But at first the king did not want to destroy his son. Then his chief subjects begged him to throw his son away, and said that perhaps in a year's time he might get another son. So the king at last agreed and threw his son into the river, at which the mother grieved and cried bitterly. Then the head wife went again to the juju man and got more medicine, which made the king forget Adia for 3 years, during which time she was in mourning for her son. She then returned to her father, and he got some more medicine from his juju man, which Adia gave to the king, and the king knew her and called her to him again, and she lived with him as before. Now the juju man who had helped Adia's father, the spider, was a water juju man, and he was ready when the king threw his son into the water and saved his life and took him home and kept him alive. And the boy grew up very strong. After a time, Adia gave birth to a daughter, and her, the jealous wife, also persuaded the king to throw her away. It took a long time to persuade him, but at last he agreed and threw his daughter into the water too, and forgot Adia again. But the water juju man was ready again, and when he had saved the little girl, he thought the time had arrived to punish the action of the jealous wife. So he went about among the head young men and persuaded them to hold a wrestling match in the marketplace every week. This was done, and the water juju man told the king's son, who had become very strong and was very like to his father in appearance, that he should go and wrestle, and that no one would be able to stand up before him. It was then arranged that there should be a grand wrestling match, to which all the strongest men in the country were invited, and the king promised to attend with his head wife. On the day of the match, the water juju man told the king's son that he need not be in the least afraid, and that his juju was so powerful that even the strongest and best wrestler in the country would not be able to stand up against him for even a few minutes. All the people of the country came to see the great contest, to the winner of which the king had promised to present prizes of clothes and money. And all the strongest men came. When they saw the king's son, whom nobody knew, they laughed and said, "Who is this small boy? He can have no chance against us." But when they came to wrestle, they very soon found that they were no match for him. The boy was very strong indeed, beautifully made, and good to look upon, and all the people were surprised to see how like he was to the king. After wrestling For the great part of the day, the king's son was declared the winner, having thrown everyone who had stood up against him. In fact, some of his opponents had been badly hurt and had their arms or ribs broken, owing to the tremendous strength of the boy. After the match was over, the king presented him with clothes and money and invited him to dine with him in the evening. The boy gladly accepted his father's invitation, and after he had had a good wash in the river, put on his clothes and went up to the palace, where he found the head chief of the country and some of the king's most favored wives. They then sat down to their meal, and the king had his own son, whom he did not know, sitting next to him. On the other side of the boy sat the jealous wife, who had been the cause of all the trouble. All through the dinner, this woman did her best to make friends with the boy, with whom she had fallen violently in love on account of his beautiful appearance, his strength, and his being the best wrestler in the country. The woman thought to herself, I will have this boy as my husband, as my husband is now an old man and will surely soon die. The boy, however, who was as wise as he was strong, was quite aware of everything the jealous woman had done, and although he pretended to be very flattered at the advances of the king's head wife, he did not respond very readily and went home as soon as he could. When he returned to the water juju man's house, he told him everything that had happened, and the water juju man said, As you are now in high favor with the king, you must go to him tomorrow and beg a favor from him. The favor you will ask is that all the country shall be called together, and that a certain case shall be tried, and that when the case is finished, the man or woman who is found to be in the wrong shall be killed by the Abus before all the people. So the following morning, the boy went to the king, who readily granted his requests, and at once sent all round the country, appointing a day for all the people to come in and hear the case tried. Then the boy went back to the water juju man, who told him to go to his mother and tell her who he was, and that when the day of the trial arrived, she was to take off her ugly skin and appear in all her beauty, for the time had come when she need no longer wear it. This the son did. When the day of the trial arrived, Adia sat in the corner of the square, and nobody recognized the beautiful stranger as his father's daughter. Her son then sat down next to her and brought his sister with him. Immediately his mother saw her. She said, This must be my daughter, whom I have long mourned as dead, and embraced her most affectionately. The king and his wife then arrived and sat on their stones in the middle of the square, all the people saluting them with the usual greetings. The king then addressed the people and said that he had called them together to hear a strong palaver at the request of the young man who had been the victor of the wrestling, and who had promised that if the case went against him, he would offer up his life to the able. The king also said that if, on the other hand, the case was decided in the boy's favor, then the other party would be killed, even though it were himself or one of the wives. Whoever it was would have to take his or her place on the killing stone and have their head cut off by the Abus. To this, all the people agreed and said they would like to hear what the young man had to say. The young man then walked round the square and bowed to the king and the people and asked the question, "Am I not worthy to be the son of any chief in the country?" And all the people answered, "Yes." The boy then brought his sister out into the middle, leading her by the hand. She was a beautiful girl and well made. When everyone had looked at her, he said, "Is not my sister worthy to be any chief's daughter?" And the people replied that she was worthy of being anyone's daughter, even the king's. Then he called his mother Adia, and she came out, looking very beautiful with her best clothes and beads on. And all the people cheered, as they had never seen a finer woman. The boy then asked them, "Is this woman worthy of being the king's wife?" And a shout went up from everyone present that she would be a proper wife for the king, and looked as if she would be the mother of plenty of fine, healthy sons. Then the boy pointed out the jealous woman who was sitting next to the king, and told the people his story, how that his mother, who had two skins, was the spider's daughter, how she had married the king, and how the head wife was jealous and had made a bad juju for the king, which made him forget his wife, how she had persuaded the king to throw himself and his sister into the river, which, as they all knew, had been done. But the water juju man had saved both of them and had brought them up. Then the boy said, "I leave the king and all of you people to judge my case. If I have done wrong, let me be killed on the stone by the Igbos. If, on the other hand, the woman has done evil, then let the Igbos deal with her as you may decide." When the king knew that the wrestler was his son, he was very glad and told the Igbos to take the jealous woman away and punish her in accordance with their laws. The Igbos decided that the woman was a witch, so they took her into the forest and tied her up to a stake and gave her 200 lashes with a whip made from hippopotamus hide, and then burnt her alive, so that she should not make any more trouble, and her ashes were thrown into the river. The king then embraced his wife and daughter and told all the people that she, Adia, was his proper wife and would be the queen for the future. When the palaver was over, Adia was dressed in fine clothes and beads and carried back in state to the palace by the king's servants. That night the king gave a big feast to all his subjects and told them how glad he was to get back his beautiful wife, whom he had never known properly before. Also his son, who was stronger than all men, and his daughter. The feast continued for 166 days, and the king made a law that if any woman was found out getting medicine against her husband, she should be killed at once. Then the king built 3 new compounds and placed many slaves in them, both men and women. One compound he gave to his wife, another to his son, and the third he gave to his daughter. They all lived together quite happily for some years until the king died, when his son came to the throne and ruled in his stead. Thank you for listening. The moral of the story is, when we are jealous towards another, we lose our senses of thinking positively for ourselves.